You were outside, maybe with coffee, maybe just standing in the yard the way you do on a good morning, and you noticed it without immediately knowing what you were noticing. The yard was quieter than usual. Not quiet the way it gets when it's too cold or too early. Quiet in a different way. The kind of quiet that has a texture to it, a held breath quality, like something you can't quite name just pressed pause on the entire neighborhood. You stood there for a moment. Then you went inside and figured you'd imagined it. You hadn't. When the birds in your yard go silent, not gradually, not because the seasons shifted overnight, but all at once, in the middle of an ordinary morning, something specific triggered that silence. And what triggered it is something every bird around you already knows. The yard isn't quiet because the birds left. The yard is quiet because the birds are still there, watching, and they stopped singing on purpose. What happens in the minutes before and after that silence is one of the most sophisticated alarm systems in the natural world. And once you understand what the birds in your yard are actually doing when they go quiet, you will never hear silence the same way again. If this is already making you look at the birds outside differently, hit the like button and subscribe, it really helps. And drop a comment telling me which birds visit your yard most often. I love knowing who I'm talking to. The first thing to understand is that birdsong is not background noise. It is not decoration. Every song you hear coming out of your yard in the morning is a bird actively broadcasting information about territory, about health, about availability as a mate, about the safety of the immediate environment. Song is expensive, it takes energy, it draws attention. A bird singing from an exposed branch is making a calculated decision that the benefits of singing, advertising itself, holding its territory, outweigh the risks. When that calculation flips, the singing stops. The research on avian alarm behavior documents something that birders and wildlife biologists call acoustic monitoring, the collective, moment-to-moment maintenance of sound in a bird community that functions as a shared early warning system. Ornithologists studying this phenomenon have found that mixed species flocks and loose neighborhood bird communities maintain something close to a continuous acoustic baseline. When that baseline drops suddenly, every bird in the area registers it. Think of it the way you would notice if every car on a highway suddenly slowed down at once. You'd know, without seeing what caused it, that something up ahead changed. The birds in your yard operate the same way, except their highway is the air above your property, and the signal they're reading is the presence, absence, or shift in the songs of every other bird around them. A northern cardinal that stops singing mid-phrase is not a bird that forgot its song. A house finch that goes silent on the fence is not a bird that got distracted. They stopped because something in the acoustic environment told them to stop, and every other bird in the yard heard the same message. There are several distinct types of bird silence, and they mean different things. Most people experience them as the same thing. The birds stopped, but the birds are not experiencing them that way at all. The first type is predator silence. This is the one you feel before you understand it. A Cooper's hawk drifts over the yard, or a sharp-shinned hawk drops from a nearby oak, and within 2 or 3 seconds, every bird that was singing or moving has vanished into cover. The yard doesn't just get quiet, it gets still. No rustling, no wing movement, nothing. This is not a coincidence. It is a coordinated response to a specific threat, and it is triggered not just by sight but by alarm calls. The alarm call system in backyard bird communities is more structured than most people realize. Many species produce what researchers call a Seet call, a thin, high-pitched vocalization that is extremely difficult to localize. You can hear a Seet call and not be able to tell where it came from, which is precisely the point. The bird that makes it is warning its neighbors without giving away its own position to the predator overhead. A black-capped chickadee's alarm response is one of the most studied examples in behavioral ecology. Chickadees produce their familiar chickadee call in different configurations depending on what kind of threat they've detected. A small, fast, maneuverable predator, like a Cooper's hawk, generates a call with more D notes added to the end because a small, fast predator is more dangerous to a small bird than a large, slow one. Chickadees can also produce a high, thin whistle that signals aerial predator, and when neighboring birds hear it, they stop, not eventually, immediately. Stand in your yard the next time the birds go silent and look up. More often than you expect, there will be something overhead, a hawk riding a thermal, a crow being mobbed out of the area, a great blue heron moving between water sources. The birds saw it before you did, and they told each other before you had any idea anything had changed. The second type of silence is subtler and often misread as the first. It happens when a cat enters the yard, not when the cat attacks, when the cat arrives. A domestic cat moving slowly along a fence line or garden bed is one of the most effective silencers of birdsong that exists, and it doesn't require any dramatic action to produce the effect. The birds see the cat. They register the pattern of movement, low, slow, hunting movement, and they stop. The songs stop. The short movement flights stop. Everything stops. The cat, for its part, may not even have noticed the birds yet. This is where a lot of backyard bird watchers misread the silence. They come outside, the yard is quiet. They don't see a predator. They assume the birds just moved on. Meanwhile, the birds are in the shrubs, in the canopy, in the brush pile, sitting completely still and watching the cat complete its patrol. The moment the cat leaves or settles somewhere visible and non-threatening, the acoustic baseline resumes, tentatively at first, then fully. If your yard birds go quiet and the silence lasts longer than 10 or 15 minutes, and you don't see an obvious explanation, walk the perimeter, check the base of the fence, look under the cars. Somewhere nearby, something with claws is either moving or resting. The third type of silence is the one that catches most people completely off guard, because it comes from inside the yard, not outside it. It's competitive pressure silence, and it is far more common in late spring and early summer than anyone expects. When a new dominant bird establishes territory in or adjacent to your yard, a mockingbird, a red-tailed hawk taking up a nesting position nearby, even an unusually bold blue jay holding a feeding area, the birds that were previously singing freely from your feeder and your fence posts and your garden stake may simply stop singing in those spots. Northern mockingbirds are worth pausing on here because their effect on neighborhood bird acoustics is remarkable and almost always underestimated. A male mockingbird in breeding season sings through the night and holds a territory aggressively against nearly every other species that tries to occupy the same acoustic space. When a mockingbird arrives and begins asserting itself, the birds that were previously filling your yard with song don't leave the yard, they just go quiet. The mockingbird's presence, constant, loud, relentless, essentially drowns out the value of singing. Other birds' songs can't be heard through it. Territory boundaries that were maintained through song now have to be maintained through other means, or temporarily abandoned. There is a fourth type of silence that is harder to see coming and harder to diagnose once it arrives. Researchers who study habitat fragmentation and suburban bird communities call it acoustic displacement, the gradual silencing of a yard not because of any single predator or intruder, but because the yard itself has stopped being a place worth singing in. Birds sing where they feel safe enough to sing. That sounds simple, but the conditions that produce that feeling of safety are more specific than most people realize. Cover matters. Dense shrubs, layered planting, places a bird can drop into if something comes. Sight lines matter. A bird singing from an exposed perch needs to be able to see threats approaching from multiple directions. Consistency matters. A yard that feels predictably safe on Monday and unpredictably unsafe on Wednesday because of a dog that gets let out at random times or a gate that slams or a sprinkler that fires without warning is a yard whose birds will eventually stop committing to it fully. A yard that looks perfect from the outside, full feeders, clean water, plenty of birds visiting, can still be acoustically thin. The birds are there. They are eating. They are not singing. And the difference between a yard where birds eat and a yard where birds sing is the difference between a place birds tolerate and a place birds trust. You may not have noticed this distinction before. Most people don't, because the feeder traffic looks the same either way. But if you stand in your yard on a May morning and count the distinct song phrases coming from inside your property line versus passing through overhead, that number tells you something about the relationship your birds have with your piece of ground. A yard truly claimed by birds, integrated into the territory maps of the species living around it, produces its own song, not borrowed song from birds passing through. Its own. If you're finding this helpful, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I upload new videos every week and I'd hate for you to miss one. Your support is what makes this channel possible, and it genuinely means the world to me. The moment most people register that the birds have gone silent is not the moment the silence begins, it's later. You're at the window on a Tuesday and the yard has been quiet for 3 mornings in a row, and you can't name exactly when it started. That gap between when the silence begins and when you notice it is important, because by the time you're conscious of it, the birds have already been running their threat assessment for days. They went silent because conditions shifted in a way that made singing feel too costly, and that shift accumulated below the threshold of your awareness while every bird in the yard was already watching it happen. What changed? It could be several things layered together. A neighborhood cat on a new patrol route. A hawk that settled in the oak 2 doors down. A neighbor's renovation that took out a privet hedge 6 species were using as cover. Any one of those alone might not have been enough. Together, they shifted the birds' collective math on your yard. This is where the science of bird behavior gets genuinely interesting, and where it stops being abstract. Ornithologists studying suburban bird communities have documented what they call the landscape of fear effect, the way prey animals like songbirds don't just avoid places where predators are currently present, they avoid places where predators have recently been present, even after the predator is gone. The fear is written into the place itself, temporarily. It persists in behavior long after the cause has moved on. A Cooper's hawk that struck near your feeder 2 weeks ago and hasn't been back since is still shaping the behavior of every bird that witnessed that strike, or arrived afterward, and read the site as dangerous. The birds are updating their risk maps continuously, and those maps include the memory of events you've already forgotten about. What this means practically is that bird silence in your yard is almost never about the present moment. It is almost always about something that happened in the recent past and left a residue, a fear event, a predator pattern, an environmental shift that the birds registered before you did. The question then is what to do about it, and the answer requires understanding what the birds actually need in order to feel safe enough to sing again. Physical cover is the first and most immediate factor. Dense plantings at multiple heights, ground cover, shrubs, mid-canopy, tall canopy, give birds the ability to move through a yard without being exposed at every step. A bird that can travel from the brush pile to the feeder to the water source without crossing open ground is a bird that is far more likely to stay, sing, and return. If your yard is mostly open lawn with feeders on poles, the birds that visit are birds taking calculated risks every time they land. They will eat and leave. They will not sing. Native plantings accelerate this dramatically. A stand of native viburnum or a native serviceberry creates not just cover but food, berries, insects, nesting material that keeps birds in the yard long enough to begin treating it as home territory rather than a food stop. A yard with diverse native planting generates its own bird community. A yard with only feeders borrows birds from somewhere else's. Water matters more than most people expect. A moving water source, a dripper, a recirculating stream, does something a still bird bath doesn't. It produces sound. Birds hear it before they see the yard. Moving water signals the area is stable and active, exactly what a silent yard can no longer say for itself. There is one more thing that brings song back to a yard that has gone quiet, and it is the one that surprises people most when they hear it. It is you, not your feeder, not your plantings. You, your presence, your pattern, your consistency at the same times in the same way. Research on human bird habituation has documented that birds in yards with a regular, predictable human presence develop a measurably lower baseline stress response than birds in yards where humans appear randomly. The person who comes outside every morning at the same time, fills the feeder, sits for 20 minutes, and goes back in is not just a food source to the birds nearby. That person is a safety signal. Their routine tells every bird watching that this space is monitored, familiar, and low risk. When that person stops coming, travels for a week, changes their schedule, stops sitting outside, the yard loses the signal. Feeder traffic may continue, but singing drops. The birds treat the space more cautiously, the way they would treat a yard they've never fully assessed, because the one consistent element they'd built into their safety model is no longer there. You are part of the habitat. That is not a metaphor. It is behavioral ecology. The realization tends to arrive quietly. You come back from a trip and the yard feels muted. You stand at the window at the usual time and there's less happening than a month ago and you can't name what shifted. You didn't change the feeder or the seed. What you changed, without knowing it counted, was your presence. That male song sparrow singing from the fence post every morning at 7 wasn't singing into empty air. He was singing in a yard he'd assessed as safe, and part of what made it safe was the pattern of a person who appeared at the same time, moved slowly, and left without drama. When that pattern disappeared, his calculus shifted. The fence post is still there. He is still in the neighborhood. He is simply not committing to it the way he was. Go back outside. Same time, same slow movements. The song sparrow will recalibrate, sometimes only a few days of resumed routine before the singing returns. The birds didn't lose their relationship with your yard. They paused it the way you pause trust with anyone who disappears and then comes back. What all of this adds up to: the predator silence, the cat patrols, the acoustic displacement, the landscape of fear, the loss of a consistent human presence, is a picture most people never see clearly because they've been looking at birdsong as a feature of the yard, something that's either there or isn't, something that arrives on its own and disappears for reasons beyond your control. Birdsong is not a feature, it is a verdict. When the birds in your yard are singing freely, Carolina wrens from the brush pile, a white-throated sparrow working the leaf litter, an American robin from the top of the maple, they have assessed your yard, weighed its cover, food, water, predator history, and human consistency and decided it is safe enough to advertise themselves in it. The song is the verdict. The silence, when it comes, is the verdict changing. You cannot force the verdict back. You can only change the conditions that produce it. More cover, less disturbance, a consistent presence the birds can build into their model of the space. A yard that earns the silence of predators and the song of everything else. The morning it comes back, and it will come back, you'll probably be doing something ordinary. Coffee in hand, window cracked, not thinking about birds at all. And then you'll hear it, a song sparrow starting up from somewhere in the yard, tentative at first, then fuller. A chickadee picking up the thread. The acoustic bass line reassembling itself one voice at a time, the way a conversation resumes after a long silence when the people in the room have decided, without saying so, that it's safe to speak again. You'll know what it means now. Not just that the birds are back, that they decided your yard was worth singing in again. That decision belongs to them. But the conditions that made it possible, those belong to you. Thank you so much for being here until the very end. It means everything. If this video changed how you see the birds in your yard even a little, please share it with someone who loves nature. Check out the videos on your screen now. I think you'll love them. And subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next one.